Welcome to the fourth webinar of the KUASIA webinar series for the fall 2020 semester. Our speaker today is Sırma Altun. Sırma Altun got her BA and MA degrees from the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the Middle East Technical University. She is currently a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of Political Economy at the University of Sydney. Sırma is also a visiting researcher at our center, KUASIA, in this academic year. In addition to her previous works, Sırma Altun has recently published a book chapter titled Urbanization, Spatial Segregation and Class Encounters in China, co-authored with Ceren Ergenç. Today she is going to give a talk based on the dissertation that she is about to finish. The title of her talk is The Production of Global Space in Hong Kong and Taipei in the 2000s, City Branding and Cultural Built Environment. Sırma, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me start by thanking the organizers of this event, namely Burak Gürel and Center for Asia Studies at Koç University. It's a great chance to have a space for intellectual discussion at the times of a deadly pandemic. It's almost a luxury. Sometimes it seems surreal, but here we are. My name is Sırma Altun. I'm a PhD student at the Department of Political Economy at the University of Sydney. As Burak mentioned, I'm about to submit my PhD thesis for the evaluation. So the title of my PhD is The Production of Space in Hong Kong and Taipei, Socio-Spatial Struggles over Global City Formation. And the presentation that I will give today is part of my PhD thesis, as Burak also mentioned. As the title suggests, I will today focus on city branding and the production of cultural built environment. So let me first start by saying a few words about Taipei and Hong Kong. Located in northern Taiwan, Taipei City is the administrative capital of the Republic of China. As of 2018, nearly 3 million people reside in Taipei City. Taiwan's Local Government Act defines Taipei as a self-governing body entitled to elect and recall local public officials and initiate referendum on self-government matters. Taipei City government serves as the administrative body that is headed by the mayor of Taipei. Taipei mayor is popularly elected for a term of 4 years. The Taipei City government has jurisdiction over local finance, industrial policy, labor administration, business operations, urban planning, construction, transport, tourism, social welfare services, education, culture, sports, health, environment protection, and water resources. Taipei City government's income resources include local taxes, construction project profits, income from properties, trust management, private donations, and contributions. Hong Kong is a special administrative region of the People's Republic of China. As of 2018, around 7.5 million people reside in Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Headed by the Chief Executive, Hong Kong government rules Hong Kong. Chief Executive is elected by the Election Committee and appointed by the Central People's Committee of the PRC for a term of 5 years. The jurisdiction of the chief executive is defined by Basic Law, which is the mini constitution of Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The chief executive defines on government policies, issues executive orders, implements Basic Law, signs the bills passed by the Legislative Council, promulgates laws, appoints principal officers, appoints judges, signs budgets passed by the Legislative Council, and conducts external affairs in accordance with the Basic Law. Legislative Council is also a key element of Hong Kong's political system. LegCo enacts, amends, and repeals laws, examines and approves the budget introduced by the Hong Kong government, approves taxation, receives and debates the annual policy of the chief executive, and debates any issue concerning public interest. So, acknowledging the particularities of administrative and political systems in Taipei and Hong Kong, my thesis seeks to reinforce a relational account of their global city formation and socio-spatial struggles. Asking how is Hong Kong and Taipei's global space produced in the 2000s, my thesis aims to expose the specific contradictions internal to global city formation in both cities, and to question the mutual interaction between their socio-spatiality and global capitalism. So here is a brief list of the data sources that I relied during my research. I conducted field research in Hong Kong and Taipei. In total, I conducted 34 semi-structured interviews with scholars, activists, NGO members, and urban specialists in both cities. In Hong Kong, I could spend 2 months between May and June 2018, and in Taipei, I was there in January 2019. But besides these relatively longer visits, I had a chance to visit both cities 2 more times. So during my PhD time, I could visit both cities 3 times in total. So here, I wanted to share with you the structure of my thesis so that today's talk would be more maybe meaningful within the whole picture of it. So let me move to the famous question of why. Why Hong Kong and Taipei? Why global city formation? Hong Kong and Taipei embraced global city formation in the late 1990s as part of their socio-spatial repositioning vis-a-vis the rise of China and transformations in global capitalism. In Hong Kong, global city formation has been embodied within the dynamics of post-colonial socio-spatial restructuring. Upon the termination of 150 years of British colonial rule, on July 1997, the Basic Law came into effect, establishing Hong Kong Special Administrative Region under the principle of one country, two systems. Positioning the new state space vis-a-vis the mainland China and the international system has become one of the main objectives of the Hong Kong government. As a result, Hong Kong was branded as Asia's World City in 2001. The narratives of Hong Kong World City are produced and circulated through local and international promotional campaigns, such as Asia's World City, Faces of Hong Kong, Our Hong Kong, and Connect and Excel. And these campaign posters are from the Phases of campaign 2010. In Taipei, democratization and the transformation of central local relations marked global city formation. Taiwan was ruled by Kuomintang from 1949 to 1987 under the setting of a martial law, which is one of the longest martial laws, unfortunately, in the world history. So that time was highly repressive of free formation of political parties, freedom of speech, and the free press. The lifting of martial law in 1987 and the establishment of the Democratic Progressive Party as a primary opponent of the KMT led to a restructuring of state-society relations in Taiwan. In 1994, Chen Shui-bian was elected as the first mayor of Taipei from the Democratic People's Party, signifying a critical rupture from the KMT's dominance over the city's political economy. Once under the strict authority of the KMT's central decision-making, Taipei's socio-spatial positioning in the broader territory of Taiwan, not to mention in the regional and international areas, has become a matter of electoral politics. Cultural turn in global city formation has also been important in Taipei in the 2000s in terms of the production of cultural creative spaces by regenerating state-owned industrial and military infrastructure, constructing landmarks such as Taipei Performing Arts Centers, and allocating socio-spatial resources to organizing international mega events such as World Design Capital 2016, and these are the logos from that event. Equally important for Hong Kong and Taipei's global city formation has been the transformations in the spatial political economy of Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland relations over the reform and opening up of the Chinese socialist economy. On the one hand, the differential aspects of Hong Kong and Taiwan's de facto and de jure standing in international settings have generated important challenges, especially for Taipei's relationship with mainland China and with the world. On the other hand, the relocation of Hong Kong and Taiwanese industries to the mainland and the intensification of trade and investment throughout the 1990s and 2000s have consolidated Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland China growth triangle. So global city formation of Hong Kong and Taipei has been situated within the interwoven yet contradictory setting of Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland China relations. Intercity competition among Chinese, Asian, and global cities has also guided the global city formation in both cities throughout the 2000s. City branding in Hong Kong and Taipei have been built on truth claims about the spatiality, uniqueness, originality, and authenticity of both cities to elevate their competitiveness in search for monopoly ranks, and I'm referring to Harvey here. International city rankings and various global hierarchies have guided the form of Hong Kong and Taipei's emergent global space, as regulating fictions, creating a benchmark vision for both societies' future. What is more, global city formation in Hong Kong and Taipei aimed for creating a coherent city identity to cover socio-spatial, political, and economic contestations. So here, let me briefly move to global city literature. Global city literature provided an entry in my research to examine the socio-spatial processes in Hong Kong and Taipei in the 2000s. The formulation of the world city concept, as it is popularly used today, dates to the work of John Friedman during the 1980s. Building on the world systems theory, Friedman and Wolff looked at the role of cities in the world system and conceptualize world city formation as the spatial expression of the integrated world economy. In this view, global capital used key cities as basing points for the organization and articulation of production and markets. And as you can see in the table, the separation between core and semi-peripheral countries is a direct reference to world systems theory. Initially formulated in the Cold War context, the World City Framework lacked an analysis of the cities in the socialist world at the time, including China and the Soviet Union. Hence, what was termed as world cities were actually the cities of the capitalist world. This line of research was followed by Saskia Sassen and Peter Taylor during the 1990s. In defining global cities as post-industrial production sites dominated by advanced producer services, global city literature addressed the function they assumed in the world economy. In the 2000s, the scope of literature has broadened in a way to study culture and creativity as pivotal denominators of urban processes around the world. Also, the network connectivity of world cities has been highlighted, based on flows, linkages, connections, and relations among them. In parallel to the widening scope of literature, the number of identified world cities increased from 30 in 1986 to 55 in 2018. So here in this table, you could see accountancy, advertising, banking, finance, and law were regarded as advanced producer services. And the numbers might seem lower to you, but these are the global advanced producer services, how it is defined in the literature, meaning the firms that have offices in at least 15 different cities. Here, you could see how global city map looked at 2018. You can realize how the categorization changed from being core, periphery, semi-peripheral to the alpha plus, alpha minus. So according to the method of categorization used by this literature, you can see Hong Kong as a pretty solid place as an alpha plus global city, whereas Taipei has been categorized as an alpha minus global city. Only in 2018, it moved to being an alpha global city. Its limitations aside, which I will shortly discuss, global city paradigm bears importance in studying the city as an important scale to explore the dynamics of global capitalism. Although categorized as semi-peripheral secondary world cities by Friedman in 1986, Hong Kong and Taipei's global city formation has actually become a full-fledged state project in the late 1990s. In the 2000s, global city formation in both cities have become interlinked with becoming a cultural and creative city. Developing creative industries has been key for the state's global agenda in both cities, along with accelerated urban renewal, strategies to attract talent, and the building of mega cultural infrastructures. So here I want to say a few words about the theoretical standpoint of my thesis. Although global city literature entails a detailed analysis of world cityness depicted as a top-down process, limitations prevail in conceptualizing uneven socio-spatial outcomes of the global city formation, diverse urban experiences in different parts of a specific city, and multiple and often contested spatial imaginations. Socio-spatial theory, however, proves very useful for critically exploring state-space-society relations over global city formation. The engagement with socio-spatial theory provokes my thesis to embrace a relational, materialist, and dialectical approach towards the study of global city formation, one that questions the spatiality of power. The main theoretical highlight of my thesis is to turn to the production of space, a Lefebvrean concept, to explore Hong Kong and Taipei's global city formation and socio-spatial struggles. The production of space helped this thesis to develop an understanding of global city formation as a contested process that encapsulates physical, symbolic, and political dimensions and socio-spatial struggles between the state and counter spaces. Here, I also want to emphasize the role of state for the production of space. For Lefebvre, state institutions bear special importance due to their role in the production and organization of urban space under the relations of class and property. Brenner also explores the role played by the state institutions in mediating and regulating territorial inequalities and uneven development. In doing so, he draws on the notion of state space. Here you can see in the table Brenner's notion of narrow and integral state space, interpreted by myself in my theory. So especially state space in the integral sense has a strong reference in Brenner's formulation to Gramscian integral state. And here, as you can see in the state space in the integral sense, refers to my interpretation based on Brenner's and Lefebvre's formulation. Based on Lefebvre's original formulation, state space signals the production of the territory of nation state, the production of political spaces, and the production of popular representations of state power. Extending this, Brenner defines state space as an ongoing, multiscalar practice. State space is produced and reproduced by temporal projects and transformed through sociopolitical struggles. The role of state is particularly important for Hong Kong and Taipei's global city formation. Because global city formation has been promoted by the state actors in Hong Kong and Taipei as an hegemonic urban vision in the 2000s. For example, in Hong Kong, city branding campaigns were employed by Brand Hong Kong, a communications platform established by the government in 2001. Other government initiatives such as Invest Hong Kong and Create Hong Kong have also been very active in promoting the pillar industries of global city formation, including finance, trade, tourism, logistics, and culture and creativity. Hong Kong governments played a central role for the construction of mega global city projects, namely Hong Kong Disneyland, Victoria Harbour Reclamation, and West Kowloon Cultural District. The commonality among these mega projects was a particular global city vision amplified by the state to enhance Hong Kong's competitiveness and attract global business, financial activities, and tourists. Here I like to say a few more words about positioning Hong Kong as a city branding practice. This concerns the relations between global, national, and local. First, New York and London constituted models for the branding initiative. Continental referencing was used to position Hong Kong as a world city in Asia, on par with New York in America and London in Europe. The relations between the local and global was represented by Hong Kong being an international financial hub and coordinator of global economic activity. For example, regional headquarters of the multinational companies located in Hong Kong were presented as the manifestation of Hong Kong's world city status. The relations between the national and the local were conceptualized against the background of China's reform and opening up, relocation of Hong Kong's low value added manufacturing to mainland, the restructuring of Hong Kong from industrial development to service economy, and China's WTO membership. In that respect, Hong Kong was portrayed as mainland's window to the world and premier capital formation center for China. Increasing number of mainland banks and enterprises setting up headquarters in Hong Kong was acknowledged as the strength of Hong Kong's world city formation. Hong Kong's close links with Pearl River Delta region and the mainland and Hong Kong closer economic partnership agreement were highlighted as the anchors of Hong Kong's world city image. The local characteristics of Hong Kong, however, were set to differentiate Hong Kong from other Chinese cities and underline the competitive strengths of Hong Kong relative to other Asian cities such as Shanghai and Singapore. The local of Hong Kong was portrayed by world-class service providers and a highly productive workforce, modern hard and soft infrastructure, education and other institutions focused on knowledge creation, the commitment to maintaining the rule of law, freedom of expression and association, free flow of information, openness, and diversity. So here I also want to very briefly mention that Hong Kong governments work with international consultancy and marketing companies for city branding. For instance, the government initiated a brand review process in 2008, commissioning Fleshman Hillard, a global public relations firm, and Taylor Nelson Sofres, a global market research group, to conduct a review of Hong Kong's brand identity. 1.4 million Hong Kong dollar was allocated to the brand review exercise to create, I'm quoting, a shared vision for Hong Kong among local people. So the target of city branding moved from international audience to the local audience around the 2008-2009 campaigns. Let me also say a few words about Hong Kong's latest city branding campaign, which is titled Connect and Excel. In 2018, Information Services Department introduced the new branding campaign, Connect and Excel, which aims at communicating Hong Kong's high degree of connectivity globally and with mainland China. Connect and Excel campaign is built on 5 themes depicted as Hong Kong core values: cosmopolitan, dynamic, secure, diverse, and connected. Cosmopolitanism of Hong Kong is associated with blend of East and West, or East meets West mottos, which are almost cliché elements of Hong Kong's branding campaign for the 2 decades. Under cosmopolitanism, branding campaign categorizes festivals, fashion, West Kowloon cultural districts, art events, sport events, as well as sensational shopping, wine and dine. Cosmopolitanism was framed with reference to cultural consumption and cultural built environment without a well-grounded understanding of what makes Hong Kong a cosmopolitan city. Dynamism of Hong Kong is depicted with a number of world rankings such as economic freedom, openness, competitiveness, and ease of doing business. Moreover, dynamism is equated with finance, insurance, banking, fintech, trade, and offshore renminbi businesses. What is more, the connectivity of Hong Kong is associated with mega transport infrastructures linking Hong Kong with mainland, such as Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge and Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Kong Express Rail Link. Although mega infrastructural projects were cherished as the foundations of Hong Kong's global city status in previous years, Connect and Exile campaign puts them a special emphasis with photos appearing on campaign posters. And these are the two examples of it. Moreover, Belt and Road Initiative is celebrated to enhance Hong Kong's gateway role for companies seeking to access China or for mainland companies reaching out to the world. Compared with the previous Faces of Hong Kong and Our Hong Kong campaigns, Connect and Exile portrays a rather faceless Hong Kong, leaving aside the effort of painting a human face to the world city. Instead, the campaign expresses a strong message about Hong Kong as a city for businesses rather than residents to connect and exile. So this is an aerial view of West Kowloon Cultural District. The part that you see in the photo under construction is reclaimed land, and it's a gigantic project, one of the biggest cultural infrastructures in the world, I guess, as far as I know. And this has been produced in line with Hong Kong's global city formation. Promoted by the Hong Kong government as one of the largest and the most significant cultural projects in the world, West Kowloon Cultural District symbolizes the production of global space in Hong Kong. Upon the establishment of the project in 2008, the West Kowloon Cultural Authority was allocated an upfront 21.6 billion Hong Kong dollars for the development of the West Kowloon Cultural District. This upfront payment and also the spatial dimension of the project in terms of land reclamation has been highly debated. I have to note that. So I will move now to the role of state in Taipei's global city formation. In Taipei, local government departments such as the Department of Information and Tourism, the Department of Urban Development, and the Department of Cultural Affairs have been active in developing city branding strategies under the leadership of Mayor of Taipei City Government. Cultural turn in Taipei's global city formation was encouraged by the state at both central and local levels. Competing with the rise of mainland China and responding to the negative effects of Asian financial crisis, Taiwanese state launched Challenge 2008 program, Creative Taiwan Action Plan, while also promulgating Culture and Creative Industry Development Act. This way, cultural creative industries was categorized among Taiwan's pillar industries. The production of cultural spaces, such as international arts, popular music, and cultural exhibition centers, were boosted as a national development priority. In parallel, the Taipei city government introduced Taipei Vision 2050 that highlighted the revitalization of the historic Taipei neighborhoods, the transformation of the historical industrial and military buildings into cultural creative spaces, promotion of cultural tourism, and the projection of Nangang Economic and Trade Park as the hub of culture and creative industries in Taiwan, and also it aims to be the hub in the region as well. In terms of the development of Taipei's cultural vision, I want to emphasize the role of Charles Landry's consultancy to the Taipei city government between 2012 and 2014. Charles Landry was commissioned by the Taipei city government as a consultant for Taipei's creative city formation between 2012 and 14. Landry visited Taipei each year for a minimum of 15 days for assessing the city's creative performance and giving suggestions for cultural city branding. During his consultancy, Landry published 3 books, and here you see the cover of one of his books titled Talented Taipei, the Creative City Imperative. So in this book, Landry defines creative city formation for Taipei as a matter of survival for the city. To survive in the new global context, Landry advises the Taipei city government to produce a spatial geography of creativity, an ensemble of creative hotspots, quarters, zones, clusters, and districts for promoting cultural creative industries. Landry highlights the importance of turning idle industrial spaces such as warehouses, tobacco and steel factories, old markets, and military barracks into cultural built environment. The best examples of creative city building Landry refers to are dominantly Western cities. Yet he repeatedly quotes Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Seoul as the competitors of Taipei in attracting talents through creative city formation. For example, Landry advises Taipei to build a creative bureaucracy, following the example of Belgium, to compete with the comprehensive talent attraction program of Singapore. Along with cultural city branding, the production of cultural creative spaces has been another key element of Taipei's global city formation, as I said before. The production of cultural creative spaces took mainly 2 forms. The first is the redevelopment of the historical idle buildings, and second is the construction of landmark cultural spaces. And here you see in the table 4 examples of cultural creative spaces in Taipei. There is more, but these are selected to showcase the redevelopment of the historical buildings. As the selected examples show, Taipei's cultural creative spaces are located on historical, industrial, and military buildings, mainly carrying the remnants of Japanese colonial architectural imagination. In this sense, the production of Taipei's cultural creative spaces has been a process of integrating colonial history within the contemporary city development strategies, as an example of which can be found in the promotion of cultural tourism. Taipei city government also constructs landmark built environments, such as Taipei Performing Arts Center, to internationally represent Taipei's cultural city status. Taipei Performing Arts Center is a multi-purpose cultural center designed by the Dutch architectural firm Office of Metropolitan Architecture, collaborating with Taiwan's KUASIA architect. The construction of the Taipei Performing Arts Center started in 2012 under the supervision of the Department of Cultural City Affairs in Taipei city government. With a budget of 5.37 billion Taiwanese dollars, Taipei Performing Arts Center was planned to be one of the biggest infrastructural projects in Taiwan and in the region. Recurrently staying behind the schedule and exceeding the expected cost over the years of its construction, Taipei Performing Arts Center is still under construction at the time of writing of this thesis, and it's a photo from 2019, January. So let me conclude by referring to some quotes from the interviews that I conducted in both cities. So here, as the 3 quotes from the interviews show, in Hong Kong, my interviewees were highly critical of global city formation process, the city branding concept, and the socio-spatial restructuring that comes with it. As the high insights from the interviewees show, there is a significant discrepancy between the top-down representation of Hong Kong as Asia's world city and the everyday world city experience of Hong Kong residents. The government's funds allocated to the physical and conceptual production of global space throughout the 2000s hasn't overcome the socio-spatial inequalities in Hong Kong, yet has deepened them in important ways. So here are two quotes from the interviews from Taipei. The first one is a relatively long quote from a scholar and art activist working in one of Taiwan's most well-known art schools. And I want to read the quote here because I find it very important in understanding the process in Taiwan. So in quotes, in Taiwan, not only in Taipei, government provides infrastructure for particular type of art production. As a result, artists lose their struggle power. They don't think about Taiwan's serious problems. Art spaces are separated from broader communities, including workers. Art is separated from social problems. Artists don't think about real social change. It is related with the cultural policy the government follows. Within cultural governance, every year art students do projects for social engagement and participation. For artists, it is a business, a paid job. They choose the project that they can earn money and survive. Having said that, I had another interview in Taipei with an art student. And her project was a very exceptional one, titled Whose Land, Whose Time? Her project is about real estate and gentrification in Taipei through the story of sign walkers, people who hold banners to advertise properties in newly gentrified neighborhoods. So the story here is that Taipei city government in some neighborhoods limited real estate advertisements on the billboards and limited the advertising products on the walls. So the real estate companies came up with a new solution. They started hiring people to hold banners to advertise properties. Later, the Taipei city government limited the duration of a person who could stand in the pavement and hold a banner, advertising banner. So the real estate company found another solution that they urged people, the sign walkers, to walk around the areas and hold banner for advertising the properties. So this is an art project about this. So my interviewee suggests sign walkers are underprivileged people. Some of them are homeless. When asked about the reason of working on this project, the interviewee replies, cultural policy gives artists security to sustain their lives, but it also creates a homogeneous idea about art, recreational activity for general public. In contrast, she wants to tell the story of underprivileged people, like homeless sign walkers who walk or stand all day to advertise properties that they never be able to buy. This way, she aims to counter the idea of recreational art by bringing the social problems of Taipei into people's attention. As this exceptional art project shows, the discursive coherence of Taipei's global cultural city narrative is misleading. Rather, everyday world city experiences of Taipei residents are multiple and contested, and there is an ongoing struggle between the top-down representations of space and differential spatial imaginations like that of the art student. So on that note, I want to conclude. Thank you for everybody for your time and attention.
Thank you, Sırma. So, floor is yours. Participants, you can ask your questions directly to the presenter. I also have a couple of questions, but if someone wants to go first. Okay, so I can start asking a few questions. So I haven't visited Hong Kong yet. I visited Taiwan for a couple of days in 2019, actually, quite recently. What seems interesting is that giganticism and basically this gentrification, they do not seem quite strong in Taipei. Taipei still seems like a modest-looking city compared to places like Hong Kong, right? These huge skyscrapers and extremely gentrified-looking space. Maybe, of course, I don't claim, based on my couple of days' experience on Taipei, I don't claim that it's very different from elsewhere, but it looks, comparatively modest looking. So I am wondering first whether this is really the case. Second, if this is the case, if Taiwan is less gentrified and less, let's say, gigantic compared to Hong Kong, whether this is because of more powerful anti-gentrification struggles in Taipei, and basically, how do you periodize and compare these, anti-gentrification movements in both cities? How do you compare them? How do you periodize them, at least for the last, 2 decades?
Should I answer now, or are we going to take a couple of questions?
It doesn't matter. I mean, you can choose.
Okay. So let me answer this one. Yeah. So let me go back maybe to the structure of my thesis so that I can answer more properly here. So my claim is to discuss global city formation in relation to socio-spatial struggles and the movements you mentioned, anti-gentrification movements. Although I'm not naming it that way, but is actually something that I've been discussing in the thesis. And we can see this in 2 different aspects, I think. One is the aspect of public housing, and the other, the movements around public housing, and the other is, as you said, anti-forced eviction in gentrification on urban renewable neighborhoods. So the global city formation starts in the early 2000s, but the results in terms of heightened inequalities, socio-spatial inequalities, I guess the results started to be seen in both cities, although in Hong Kong in a more heightened way around 2010s, and this is when the movements also started to become more visible, I guess. So in Hong Kong, the main debate is about land scarcity. When the government mentions, say, for example, why they cannot build more public housing, or why they cannot allocate more space for building of public housing, they always put forward the issue of land scarcity in Hong Kong. And in contrast to that, the movements claim about land distribution. So they always say it's not a problem of land scarcity, but a problem of land distribution. The movements not necessarily say, oh, this is because of global city formation, but they make a historical analysis, actually, starting the issue from the colonial period, but also bringing the question to the hegemony of the landed class in Hong Kong. But maybe the main difference between Hong Kong and Taipei in terms of the movements is that the clash between the state and the movements in terms of this issue is more strong in Hong Kong than to Taipei. So Taipei movements, for example, the anti-forced eviction movement in the urban renewable neighborhoods, couldn't necessarily get from the government what they wanted, but they had, relative to the Hong Kong movements, more space to express themselves, which led, in my understanding, to the later organization of other movements, their amalgamation with other movements, such as the sunflower movement, for example. Yeah, so in terms of expression, space for expression, say for example through democratic channels, because for example public housing is a matter of electoral politics in Taipei, for example. The movements in Taipei had more space than Hong Kong movements. I could definitely say that. But the urban form, I'm not sure if it would be too simplistic to suggest that this is because of the space of expression of the movements. I can't necessarily say this. I guess this would be a bold claim. Yeah, I mean, did I answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. There is one in the Q&A box. Another question there, written question.
Let me see the Q&A box. Our socio-spatial struggles also presents distribution of power in terms of cultural capital. Well, yeah, relatively. I mean, distribution of power, I'm not sure. But I am seeing a direct relationship between the rise of socio-spatial struggles joined by artists and activists in both cities, especially from the 2010s onwards. So what I'm calling counter spaces in Hong Kong and Taipei, one of the major components of those counter spaces are the artist activists. Whether this leads to a distribution of power in terms of cultural capital, I'm not sure. But I can say I can definitely say the artist activists are struggling with the cultural city branding, culture being the pillar industry, only valuable for economic growth reasons. They are definitely struggling with this idea, and their struggle with this idea leads them to think about some other ways of being, I guess. So that's why they join socio-spatial struggles, or they bring art into space of movement. I think that's a better way of saying it. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? If there's
Sure.
no one else?
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting, and I always found Taipei as a very artistic city. So I guess now I know why. I would like to take up on your point that the city is an important scale for global capitalism, and the role of the nation state as a territorial power in that statement. So when we compare Taipei and Hong Kong, for the case of Taipei, I understand that, well, in both cases, I guess I understand that the state is the driver of this cultural city branding thingy. And in the Taipei's case, the central local relations is much clearer. But when we come to Hong Kong, I think I've kind of like lost track of the agency there. When you were talking about like all these, like from 99 all the way to today, like the world city and everything. So who is the agency there? Like, is it the mainland state, Beijing government, or is it the Hong Kong government? And and like you made like a very interesting point about like in 99, for example, the Ph.D. connections and everything. So like Hong Kong is put as the mainland window to the world, right? And then in 2008, the target of the city branding moved from international to local in a way to convince the locals, I guess, about this idea, right? Like the Hong Kongers. So So what I'm trying to ask is, like, in the Taipei case, it seems like the artist activists are against the cultural city branding of the local and central governments because of the capitalistic relations. But in the case of Hong Kong, there is also political tension between the Hong Kong locals, as well as like the pro-mainland Hong Kong government, and obviously the mainland government as well, as far as I understand. Um, in terms
Okay.
of like defining Hong Kong as a part of the mainland, not only as a cultural production within the global capitalist system, but also defining it as a part of a political system as well. So can you talk a little bit about that? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of Hong Kong, city branding activities is, I mean, the main agent there is Hong Kong government. So to my knowledge, mainland government doesn't necessarily involve in urban issues. I mean, urban here is urban planning, city branding, socio-spatial restructuring in the city. Besides the mega construction projects, we know that they are definitely done in collaboration with the mainland, such as the bridge, for example, but not West Kowloon Cultural District. It's also a mega project, but it's initiated by Hong Kong government. So in terms of city branding, cultural city formation, global city formation, I guess it is more of it is initiated with more of the Hong Kong government rather than the mainland government.
Mm-hmm.
And city branding rhetoric, it's very interesting that it moves parallel to socio-spatial transformations in the city, which involves the struggles as well. So I want to show you the timetable here again, so that so here in Hong Kong city branding timetable, you could see in 2008 a brand review, Hong Kong brand review process is initiated by the government. And the main problem here was that the city branding of Hong Kong as Asia's world city didn't really correspond to the local people. I mean, the local people didn't really engage with the city brand of Hong Kong. They weren't necessarily aware of city branding activity. Plus, the city was highly shaken by the movements in the 2000s. So the two reasons: one, the city branding activity had no correspondence among the local people. I mean, no, or like very low correspondence. And two, there were a lot of movements happening in the urban field that they wanted to brand. So the review process was actually a result of both. And the reason why the review, the following branding campaigns targeted the local people was because of the movements, and especially the heritage preservation movements happening at the time in the city. But then in 2018, interestingly, we see that concern has again left behind. So the main target of city branding is not anymore the local people. I have my doubts that it's international arena. I guess the main target of city branding in 2018 is mainland China. So the campaign was more like, oh, we are part of mainland China city branding. And this is more clear if we compare it with 2001, when Hong Kong was put as Asia's world city. And Hong Kong is the world city in Asia, not Shanghai, not Shenzhen, not Taipei. So only through Hong Kong you could connect with mainland China. So the claim there was different than the claim in 2018, definitely, we could say, rhetorically. And also considering the movement fields, it's not as surprising that they left the idea of connecting with Hong Kong people behind, because this is the government we're talking about, and we know about the heightened movements in Hong Kong. So I don't think city branding anymore has this concern of government coming together with the local people around the shared idea, around the shared urban vision. I think they left it behind, that's concern. That's my understanding. Yeah. Yeah, did I answer the
Yeah.
question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Other questions? I have one more question, actually.
Mhm.
I mean, so you compare these two cities,
Mhm.
and of course, I mean, you track how they culturally brand the cities and so on. But is there a sort of transnational dimension of this comparison? Meaning that, you know, do the capitalists of both cities and, let's say, movement actors, like, you know, of these cities learn from each other, strategize with each other, talk to each other? So do you see, you know, these two cities connecting, of course, with the, you know, global capital and social movements across the world, but or artistic field across the world, but at the same time, do they really learn from each other, or unlearn from the mistakes of each other?
So for movements, it's easier for me to answer this question, and I would say definitely yes. They are in close contact with each other. They follow what they are doing. They have, say, brother sister organizations in both cities. Especially, for example, Liberal Research Community in Hong Kong has a very close relationship with Organization for Urban Reform in Taipei, and they are the NGO, not NGOs, but activist initiatives necessarily working on urban space. So my focus was the urban space NGOs, urban movement, the NGOs, activist initiatives in the urban field. So on that front, I could definitely say yes, they are in exchange. But what I can mention is the Sunflower Movement and Umbrella Movement had been a catalyzer of the exchange between the movements. In terms of the governments and city branding practices, well, I didn't see any direct reference, at least in the resources that I engaged with, in terms of learning from each other. But there are a lot of references in terms of competing with each other. I mean, not necessarily Hong Kong and Taipei, but in general, cities in Asia, including Shanghai, Singapore, Seoul. And it's interesting how this hierarchy, let me show, for example, here, this hierarchy necessarily is internalized in the city branding practices, because, say, for example, in terms of Hong Kong is set to compete more with Singapore than with Seoul, because Seoul is not in the same rank with Hong Kong. Similarly, Taipei cannot necessarily compete with Hong Kong directly, because Hong Kong belongs to an upper level in the global city hierarchy, but rather Taipei can compete with Seoul because their rank is closer to each other. Things like that, yeah. So intercity competition is the phenomena that is highly referenced, both in consultancies, suggestions, rankings, but also in terms of how the city branding practices and cultural built environment practices is legitimized by Hong Kong government and also Taipei city government. Yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Thank you.
I have a question. Hi, I'm Aiko Takeuchi Demerji, and Thank you for sharing your very interesting dissertation. And actually, my question is related to what Barak said and maybe also the previous question. But if there's this disconnect between the local residents, the local artists, and the city planners, organizers, comparing to other world cities, are there like models? Are there other cities that do a better job in terms of connecting with the local people? So in other words, my question is are Taipei and Hong Kong an exception in terms of not really listening to the local people, or is it pretty common among these world cities of not incorporating the voices and demands of the people?
I guess it's hard for me to answer this question because if I think through the global city literature, I cannot answer this question because that literature doesn't necessarily look at whether the voices of artists or counter spaces or differential spatial imaginations is heard by city branding agents. So they don't question this. So they depict a necessarily top-down process. International cities can learn from each other through their planning agencies or like city branding institutions or whatever you name it, but they don't concern much about what the residents or city users think about city branding, as far as I can say. I mean, Saskia Sassen kind of problematizes this in terms of heightened socio-spatial inequalities in global cities. And she mentions that the claims in global cities to urban space will be multiple as compared to another city because those cities are highly international, a lot of refugees, migrants, as well as the city residents and also the expats live in those cities. So the claims to urban spaces will be multiple, and sometimes those claims will be contested. So she mentions this, but besides that, I don't think global city literature necessarily problematizes this. So maybe like this is kind of the originality of my thesis, that I'm looking at global city formation in relation to socio-spatial struggles, and I'm trying to problematize this phenomena as an integral state space, which concerns the relations between state and society over space, mediated through space. So, for example, I haven't come across with any other thesis to my knowledge, which problematizes global city formation and also discusses public space, public housing as a problem of distribution of global city resources. So once you start asking these questions, then you realize that city planners doesn't necessarily listen to artists, activists, or like NGOs. So could I mean, maybe on the city level, there are some studies looking at the relationship between society and city planning. But yeah, to my knowledge, they are rare. I guess they must be rare. So it's not a general trend in the global city literature.
Other questions? Are there other questions? Okay, if not, so I would like to thank Sırma very much for this very interesting presentation. And I hope all of us will see each other in the future webinars of KUASIA. Have a good day.